and line on the scene and some ambulances and such. Looked up and we could see the smoke, but nothing really else was still raining out. So we were kind of just running away from the building as quickly as we could. We were unsure at that time what caused the crash or that sound and that noise.
Shauna Farrell, who was on the 36th floor of that building. Shauna, we're glad you're okay and your coworkers are okay. Thank you for joining us on the air this afternoon. You're looking at pictures right now of the smoke from the top of that building, obviously from the fire when the helicopter made impact, came down for that landing on top of the building. Unclear still what led the helicopter to force itself to make that hard landing. Obviously, the pilot encountered some sort of trouble, and it's unclear whether or not that was simply the weather or problems in addition to the weather. We can confirm at this hour 1 deceased in the helicopter, no other injuries. The fire has been extinguished, but again, you're looking at pictures of the smoke following that impact. And as you just heard Shauna Farrell, she's an eyewitness. She was on the 36th floor in the middle of a meeting with coworkers when they felt the building shake. She described a whizzing sound outside the windows of that building. You could just imagine the fear for the people who work in that building, given the history of what we've witnessed and encountered here in New York City when it comes to aircraft and when these high rises are involved. You did hear the governor come out very quickly, Governor Andrew Cuomo, saying there is no sign that this was at all terror-related. The investigation quickly now turns to what it was on that helicopter. I want to bring in ABC's David Curley. He's our chief aviation correspondent. Because, David, for those who are familiar with New York City and who have visited this city, as many have, you often look up to the sky and see those helicopters. There are tour helicopters. There are helicopters that will take you out to the main airports. And I've just learned here moments ago that there's a ground stop at several of the airports here in New York City, which speaks to that weather issue.
It could be actually that weather issue, David. The one thing to remember, nearly all these incidents, it's rarely just one factor. So it could be that the weather was a contributing factor. There could have been a mechanical, and as Colonel Ganyard suggested, there's a possibility that the pilot was looking to put this down at the closest place without hurting anybody on the ground. And the fire would make sense as a crash landing, not knowing how much fuel he actually had on board, that you would have a fire associated with it. But there are a lot of questions to answer in one of these, and yes, a lot of helicopters and a lot of aircraft around New York. You know, it's been a long time. It was 13 years ago in 2006 that a small plane crashed into one of the skyscrapers in Manhattan. But there is a tremendous amount of air traffic around that every day. And as we heard from a pilot who flies around there a little bit earlier today, different pilots, different companies have different rules about whether you can fly in the kind of weather conditions that you have there. So much more to learn about what all the factors were that led to this helicopter landing hard on top of that skyscraper.
That's our aviation transportation correspondent, David Curley, joining us for live coverage right now. You are watching our coverage of what has been a deadly helicopter accident in Midtown Manhattan. You can tell from the signal right there that the weather has been difficult here in New York City, really for several hours now. A heavy rain and wind at times here in New York City, and as David has mentioned and several others, that's going to be a main factor that they investigate. We do know, preliminary read from law enforcement sources at this hour, that helicopter was in some sort of trouble and that the pilot tried to put it down at the nearest flat spot. You heard Colonel Ganyard say that's at the discretion of the pilot during an emergency situation, who would obviously try to avoid casualties on the ground. A city of 9 million people or more here in New York. And of course, it's the workday. Midtown Manhattan, very busy at this hour. And what we don't know is what that pilot encountered and what if there were any other options that the pilot might have looked at before deciding to try to make that landing on the top of a high-rise in New York City. One of the things we learned is that there aren't any helipads on the top of any buildings here in New York City for precisely that reason, to avoid accidents or putting the people of New York City in any more danger than they might already be in, with helicopters and aircraft flying over this city. But again, one dead at this hour. It's believed it is the pilot of that helicopter encountering some sort of trouble within the last hour as it was flying over Midtown Manhattan, a hard landing at 787 7th Avenue. That's at 51st and 7th. There was a fire that ensued. That fire has now been put out, and you've seen the pictures here on ABC News of the smoke billowing from the top of that building and that harrowing description of the workers inside who did not know what was happening to their building. One worker describing the whizzing sound of an aircraft nearby and then the building shaking. She also described several of her coworkers, including herself, running down the stairs of that building to get to safety. We will have much more on our digital channel live this afternoon and at abcnews.com, and of course a complete wrap-up on World News Tonight. I'll see you then. In the meantime, good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.